On a chilly morning in Charleston, West Virginia, the quiet hum of the city was pierced by a renewed sense of anticipation. It had been decades since anyone had spoken about the disappearance of 24-year-old Lauren Mitchell, a bright and ambitious young woman whose life had been abruptly stolen in 2001. At the time, Lauren had been finishing her first year as a nurse at the local hospital. Known among colleagues for her dedication and compassion, her friends remembered her laughter echoing through the halls, her careful attention to patients, and her tendency to put others first. That autumn evening, when she left a friend's apartment after a late-night study session, she never returned home. The initial search was intense, with police canvassing neighborhoods, checking hospitals, and interviewing anyone who might have seen her, but the trail went cold almost immediately. Her family, particularly her mother, Margaret, and father, Richard, never stopped searching. Every day without Lauren stretched into years of unanswered questions, late-night phone calls to the police, and a deep, gnawing uncertainty that life would never feel complete again. Friends recalled watching Margaret pace the living room, frantically scanning newspapers and TV reports for any clue. The pain was compounded by the lack of answers. No witnesses, no credible leads, no sign of Lauren at all. Despite the passage of time, Margaret and Richard clung to hope, a fragile belief that one day someone would provide information that would finally reveal what had happened to their daughter. The police file on Lauren's disappearance had become a thick stack of documents, collected from the initial investigation and from tips that had trickled in over the years. Detectives had revisited the case repeatedly, each time encountering the same frustration. Physical evidence was sparse, leads had dried up, and memories of potential witnesses had faded. Yet, within the department, a quiet determination persisted. New technology was emerging, particularly in forensic science, that offered a glimmer of hope. DNA genealogy had begun to show promise in solving cold cases, and Lauren's file, with samples carefully preserved from the time of her disappearance, became a candidate for this cutting-edge approach. In 2020, nearly 2 decades after Lauren vanished, a breakthrough occurred. A forensic genealogist reviewing unsolved cases came across the preserved DNA evidence from Lauren's case. After months of painstaking work, comparing her DNA to databases, and constructing potential family trees, the team identified a promising lead. The match suggested a connection to an individual with prior criminal activity, someone who had been living in West Virginia during the time Lauren disappeared. Detectives quickly organized surveillance and interviews, careful not to alert the suspect prematurely. The tension in the department was high. After so many years, the idea that they might finally have a real lead was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. The suspect, 42-year-old Gregory Harlan, had lived in various small towns across the state, maintaining a low profile and avoiding close scrutiny. To neighbors, he seemed unremarkable, quiet, reserved, and somewhat solitary. However, the DNA link changed the narrative entirely. Officers obtained search warrants for his residence, meticulously combing through items, photographs, and personal records. It was during this search that they uncovered objects that directly tied him to Lauren's disappearance. Among them were personal belongings that had been reported missing, fragments of fabric matching clothing Lauren had worn, and journals hinting at obsession and planning. These discoveries, combined with the DNA evidence, solidified the case against him. When Gregory Harlan was brought in for questioning, his calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the weight of the evidence against him. Detectives presented the DNA match and the physical evidence, observing his reactions closely. Initially, he denied any involvement, attempting to deflect and confuse. But the investigators were patient, methodical, and unrelenting. They reviewed timelines, placed him near the areas Lauren had frequented, and confronted inconsistencies in his statements. Slowly, the pressure mounted, and cracks began to appear in his story. Hours turned into a day-long interrogation, and then, finally, in a moment that left everyone in the room tense and anxious, he confessed. The confession was chilling in its calm delivery. Harlan recounted, in sparse detail, how he had encountered Lauren one evening, how circumstances escalated tragically, and how he had concealed her body to avoid detection. He described efforts to cover his tracks, the careful avoidance of witnesses, and the sense of invulnerability he had felt, believing the crime would remain hidden. For the detectives, the confession brought a mix of relief and horror. Relief that Lauren's fate was finally known, horror at the magnitude of his deception and the years of suffering inflicted on her family. Margaret and Richard were informed, cautiously prepared for the emotional weight of the revelation. When the news reached the public, Charleston was stunned. Residents who had followed the case decades ago felt the shock ripple through the community. Friends of Lauren, some of whom had grown up and moved away, returned to the city to support her family. Social media lit up with messages of sympathy, support, and anger at the circumstances that had allowed such a crime to remain unsolved for so long. For the Harper family, it was an emotional maelstrom, years of grief and uncertainty, now met with a strange combination of closure and renewed sorrow. The fact that Lauren's body could now be recovered, and that a trial would follow, provided a sense of justice in a way that the family had feared might never come. Law enforcement emphasized the importance of modern technology in solving cold cases. Public briefings highlighted how DNA preservation, careful record-keeping, and forensic genealogy had converged to bring a decades-old crime to light. Investigators spoke about the meticulous work required, the collaboration between local police, state authorities, and private genealogists, and the patience necessary to pursue a case for nearly 20 years. For many officers, Lauren Mitchell's case became a symbol of perseverance, proof that no lead is ever too small and no case too old to merit attention. For Margaret and Richard Mitchell, the emotional impact was profound. The parents who had endured sleepless nights, endless worry, and the pain of unanswered questions could now, finally, grieve fully, knowing the truth. They met with counselors and support groups, sharing their story to aid other families facing prolonged uncertainty. In small, intimate gatherings with friends and neighbors, they recalled Lauren's life, the laughter, the ambition, the small acts of kindness that had defined her character. Through these conversations, her memory was preserved and honored, transforming grief into a form of remembrance and legacy. As the investigation progressed toward trial, community engagement increased. Evergreen residents attended town hall meetings, listened to updates from law enforcement, and participated in initiatives to support victims' families. Schools included discussions about safety and the importance of vigilance, using Lauren's story to highlight how one life can impact a community. Local journalists produced in-depth features on the case, examining the intersection of science, persistence, and justice, illustrating to readers nationwide that advances in technology could bridge decades of silence. Through it all, the Mitchell family focused on healing. Small rituals, lighting candles, sharing stories, visiting places Lauren had loved became vital acts of remembrance. Friends and extended family helped organize memorials, community gardens, and scholarship funds in Lauren's name. While nothing could erase the loss or the years of anguish, These efforts provided a tangible connection to her life and to the idea that her memory could inspire, guide, and endure. For Charleston, the resolution of Lauren Mitchell's case symbolized the possibility of justice, the power of persistence, and the hope that even the most challenging mysteries could eventually be resolved. The months following Gregory Harlan's arrest were a whirlwind of preparation, investigation, and emotional adjustment for everyone involved. Detectives worked tirelessly to reconstruct the events of 2001, piecing together a timeline that could withstand scrutiny in court. Every detail mattered: the route Lauren had taken that night, the places she had been, the interactions she had experienced. Investigators interviewed old friends, colleagues, and neighbors, revisiting statements given years ago, hoping to find a new angle or a forgotten memory that could reinforce the case. Each meeting, each conversation, brought fragments of the past into the present, painting a more complete picture of the night Lauren Mitchell disappeared. Lauren's co-workers at the hospital remembered her vividly, recalling her dedication to patients and her drive to succeed in nursing school. Nurses who had worked alongside her described the way she had prepared meticulously for each shift, the gentle guidance she offered to new staff, and the unwavering support she gave patients who were scared or in pain. Their recollections, while painful, were crucial to humanizing Lauren in court, reminding jurors that she was more than a missing person. She was a young woman with dreams, responsibilities, and a life abruptly taken. These testimonials were carefully documented and prepared for the upcoming trial, forming a compelling narrative of who Lauren had been. The Mitchell family was deeply involved in the process. Margaret and Richard attended meetings with prosecutors, forensic experts, and detectives, learning the details of evidence handling, DNA analysis, and Harlan's confession. They struggled with a mixture of relief and renewed anguish, knowing the truth of what had happened, yet confronting the reality of the years lost. Each piece of evidence presented to them was a reminder of the enormity of the crime, but it also represented progress, a step closer to formal justice. Their lawyers emphasized the importance of emotional preparation, ensuring that Margaret and Richard could withstand the trial while remaining steadfast witnesses to their daughter's memory. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued to examine Harlan's properties and possessions, uncovering additional information that had remained hidden for nearly 2 decades. Old notebooks contained disturbing observations and sketches, some of which referenced Lauren directly. Clothing fragments and personal items were cross-referenced with missing items reported in 2001. Technology from the early 2000s, email, phone records, and diaries was painstakingly restored and analyzed, revealing patterns in Harlan's movements and behaviors. Each discovery reinforced the case and helped prosecutors anticipate potential defenses or attempts at obfuscation. The community's response was intense. Local news stations followed every development, interviewing neighbors, friends, and family. Editorials emphasized the long-awaited resolution, praising law enforcement for their persistence, while acknowledging the suffering the Mitchell family had endured. Support groups and advocacy organizations reached out to the family, offering guidance on navigating the emotional toll of the trial. Residents of Charleston, many of whom remembered Lauren's disappearance vividly, attended public briefings and community meetings, sharing memories and offering collective support. There was a renewed sense of unity in the city, a recognition that the resolution of this case represented both justice and closure for an entire community. As court dates approached, Harlan's defense attempted to challenge the DNA evidence, arguing that the passage of time made the sample unreliable. They questioned witnesses about their recollections from nearly 20 years ago, attempting to cast doubt on the accuracy of memory and testimony. However, forensic experts and prosecutors countered methodically, explaining the reliability of preserved DNA, the meticulous documentation of evidence, and the corroborating details from Harlan's own confession. Jurors were presented with a clear, chronological account of events, emphasizing both scientific certainty and the human impact of Lauren's life and tragic death. Inside the courtroom, the emotional intensity was palpable. Margaret and Richard Mitchell sat together, holding hands as they listened to testimony. Each witness painted a picture of Lauren's character, her ambition, and the night she was taken from them. The prosecution detailed Harlan's calculated actions, his efforts to conceal the crime, and the painstaking work of law enforcement in bringing him to justice. The jury was shown photographs, items recovered from Harlan's residence, and excerpts from his own writings. With each revelation, the enormity of the crime and the thoroughness of the investigation became increasingly clear, leaving little room for doubt about his culpability throughout the trial. The Mitchell family found solace in the support of friends and the wider community. Neighbors who had never met Lauren personally attended court sessions, showing solidarity and expressing admiration for the family's resilience. Counselors worked with Margaret and Richard to manage the emotional strain, guiding them through grief, anger, and the psychological impact of reliving painful memories. For them, every day of the trial was a mixture of agony and hope, painful confrontation with the past coupled with the knowledge that justice, long delayed, was finally being served. Outside the courtroom, law enforcement reflected on the evolution of the case. Detectives who had worked on Lauren's disappearance in 2001 marveled at the technological advancements that had enabled the DNA match and eventual arrest. The case became a touchstone for cold case units across the state, illustrating the importance of preserving evidence, revisiting old leads, and embracing new methods of investigation. Training sessions incorporated the lessons learned from Lauren's case, emphasizing patience, persistence, and the potential of forensic genealogy to solve crimes once considered unsolvable. As the trial progressed, Harlan's attempts at deflection grew increasingly desperate. He provided inconsistent statements, challenged timelines, and questioned witness credibility. Yet, the accumulation of evidence, DNA, personal belongings, and his own writings was overwhelming. Prosecutors maintained a steady, calm approach, presenting the facts clearly and methodically. They highlighted the human toll of his actions, repeatedly drawing attention to the life cut short, the years of uncertainty endured by Lauren's family, and the broader impact on the Charleston community. By framing the narrative around both the evidence and the human consequences, they ensured that the jury could not ignore the magnitude of the crime. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family continued their private acts of remembrance. Margaret organized small gatherings at Lauren's favorite park, inviting friends and family to share stories and memories. Richard set up a scholarship fund in Lauren's name, supporting young students pursuing careers in healthcare. These efforts, while quiet and personal, were an essential part of the healing process, allowing the family to honor Lauren's memory while navigating the public scrutiny of the trial. The combination of personal rituals and public proceedings helped them regain a sense of agency, transforming grief into action and remembrance. By the end of the trial, the case against Harlan was unassailable. Jurors, having reviewed the comprehensive evidence, the detailed timelines, and the personal impact of Lauren's death, were ready to deliver their verdict. The courtroom was tense as they returned to announce their decision, with the Mitchell family holding their breath, friends leaning forward in anticipation, and the wider community following updates closely. The sense of decades-long uncertainty, the relentless passage of time, and the lingering grief that had defined so many years of life would finally be confronted with a formal acknowledgement of guilt and accountability the day the jury returned its verdict in Charleston, West Virginia, was one of quiet anticipation mixed with heavy emotion. For the Mitchell family, decades of grief, uncertainty, and unanswered questions were poised to find resolution. Margaret and Richard arrived at the courthouse early, flanked by close friends and family members who had stood by them through the long, painful journey. The courtroom was filled with observers, reporters, and law enforcement officers, all aware of the weight of the moment. The sense of history in the air was palpable. This trial was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning for a crime that had haunted the community for 20 years. Inside, the jury foreman stood to read the verdict. Silence fell over the room as the words were spoken, guilty on all counts of murder. The announcement reverberated like a bell through the courthouse, leaving a collective gasp and then tears in its wake. Margaret and Richard clutched each other tightly, relief mingled with grief, tears streaming down their faces. For 20 years, they had imagined this day in countless ways, sometimes in despair, sometimes in hope. Now the reality of the verdict crystallized the pain they had carried, yet it also marked the beginning of closure. Reporters outside the courthouse swarmed the family and prosecutors, capturing the emotion and significance of the moment. It was a local story with national resonance, a testament to perseverance and the evolving power of forensic science. The sentencing phase was equally charged. Harlan, the man who had so carefully hidden his crime and manipulated everyone around him, maintained a defiant air as he faced the judge. He appeared to expect sympathy or leniency, but the courtroom was resolute. The prosecution detailed the premeditation of the crime, the decades of suffering endured by Lauren's family, and the danger Harlan had posed, not just to Lauren, but potentially to others. Each point underscored the necessity of a sentence that would reflect both justice and deterrence. When the judge finally spoke, she emphasized the calculated, violent nature of the crime and the long-term impact on the victim's family. Harlan was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a verdict that left the family relieved, knowing that the man who had stolen their daughter's life would never have the chance to harm anyone else. The months following the trial were marked by an ongoing process of healing. For the Mitchell family, closure did not erase the years of pain, but it provided a framework for moving forward. Margaret and Richard continued their work in Lauren's memory, expanding the scholarship fund she had inspired and engaging in community outreach to help families of victims navigate the challenges of long-term uncertainty. The family spoke openly about the emotional complexity of living through a cold case resolution, describing a blend of relief, sorrow, and a lingering need to process the trauma of past decades. Therapists and support groups played an essential role, helping them rebuild a sense of normalcy while honoring the life of their daughter. In the broader community, the resolution of the case had a profound impact. Charleston residents, many of whom remembered Lauren's disappearance vividly, reflected on the fragility of safety in a small city. Parents were more vigilant, neighbors more attentive, and community programs focused on crime prevention gained renewed attention. The story served as a stark reminder that evil could reside anywhere, even in familiar surroundings, and that law enforcement, when persistent and innovative, could overcome even decades-old obstacles. The case was cited in local seminars, law enforcement trainings, and academic discussions, emphasizing the importance of evidence preservation, forensic genealogy, and careful witness interviews in solving cold cases. Law enforcement officers involved in the investigation reflected on the significance of the breakthrough. Detectives who had worked on Lauren's disappearance in 2001 marveled at the impact of modern forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, which had provided a key to unlock the mystery after 2 decades. Younger officers studying the case were inspired by the meticulous work of their predecessors and the persistence of the cold case unit, understanding that patience, innovation, and dedication could transform despair into justice. Training programs incorporated Lauren's case as a teaching tool, demonstrating the critical role of forensic evidence, community engagement, and thoughtful investigative methods for prosecutors and investigators. The case also underscored the complexity of human behavior and the long-term effects of manipulation and coercion. Harlan had managed to maintain a false narrative for decades, exerting control over those around him and hiding behind the passage of time. The process of unraveling his lies required patience, careful interviewing, and the development of trust with key witnesses who had long been silenced by fear. Each step of the investigation highlighted the intersection of psychological insight, technical skill, and persistence in solving crimes that seemed unsolvable in private moments. The Mitchell family grappled with both the relief and the lingering pain of loss. Margaret would often visit Lauren's favorite places, remembering her daughter's laughter, energy, and kindness. Richard took solace in his work and in supporting Margaret, finding purpose in the scholarship fund and community outreach programs they had established. Both parents acknowledged that closure was a process, not a moment, and that the years ahead would involve continued reflection, remembrance, and efforts to keep Lauren's memory alive. The presence of friends, neighbors, and counselors provided a support network that allowed them to navigate the complexities of post-trial life with dignity and strength. The story of Lauren Mitchell became a lasting chapter in the community's history, shaping how residents viewed safety, trust, and the capabilities of law enforcement. School programs incorporated lessons from the case, teaching students about the importance of vigilance, cooperation with authorities, and the potential of science to uncover truth. Community events honored Lauren's memory, emphasizing resilience, the importance of family, and the collective responsibility to look out for one another. Through these acts, her life, though tragically cut short, continued to influence and guide the community in meaningful ways. In the aftermath, discussions of cold cases gained renewed attention nationwide. Lauren's case illustrated how forensic genealogy could provide solutions when traditional methods had stalled. News outlets covered the resolution extensively, highlighting both the technological and human elements that had contributed to the arrest and conviction. Analysts examined the procedural steps, the preservation of evidence, and the careful re-examination of witnesses, emphasizing the lessons for other long-unsolved crimes. Lauren's story became both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of persistence, science, and justice. Even years later, Margaret and Richard would reflect on the journey with mixed emotions. The initial disappearance, the years of uncertainty, the roller coaster of emotions during the investigation, and the eventual resolution had left deep imprints on their lives. Yet, through memorial events, public speaking, and private remembrance, they ensured that Lauren's life was celebrated alongside the sorrow. The scholarship fund, community programs, and outreach initiatives provided tangible ways to honor her legacy, transforming personal tragedy into enduring impact. The Mitchell family also remained in contact with law enforcement, attending seminars and workshops to share their experience with cold case resolutions. They emphasized the emotional components, the need for persistence, and the significance of establishing trust with witnesses. Their participation helped future families navigate similar journeys, providing guidance, hope, and practical insight into how justice could be achieved, even after decades. The collaborative efforts between families, law enforcement, and the community became a model for addressing cold cases with sensitivity and effectiveness. Ultimately, the resolution of Lauren Mitchell's murder demonstrated that even after years of uncertainty and pain, justice could prevail. The combination of modern forensic techniques, unwavering investigative work, and the courage of witnesses willing to break decades of silence brought accountability to a crime that had left a permanent mark on West Virginia. While no sentence could return the years lost or erase the suffering, the conviction of Gregory Harlan provided a formal acknowledgement of truth, closure for the Mitchell family, and a powerful example for communities, law enforcement, and families facing similar tragedies. The case left an indelible imprint on Charleston, shaping perceptions of safety, law enforcement, and the potential for justice even decades after a crime. The Mitchell family, while forever marked by loss, emerged as advocates, storytellers, and pillars of strength within their community. The pursuit of truth, relentless over 20 years, affirmed the principle that crime could not always remain hidden, that patience and perseverance could overcome time, and that the voices of victims and families would not be silenced indefinitely. Lauren Mitchell's life and the eventual resolution of her murder became a symbol of endurance, justice, and the enduring power of human resilience.